If there's one central issue that divides lawyers and judges throughout the country today, it is what is the source of law? Which really means what is law itself? Is law simply what man decides is going to be the rule, or does law reflect a higher source?
Welcome to the Creation Today show, where we bring together interviews with experts and solid Bible teaching. Your host, Eric Hovind, affirms the ultimate authority of God's Word, the truth of creation, and why it matters to you.
Have you ever wondered, where does justice really come from? Is it something that humans made up? Did it evolve? Survival of the fittest? Or is it might that makes the rules, might makes right? Or is there a higher source that has guided law throughout history? You think about it, from the ancient laws of Moses to the courtroom battles of today, justice has been shaped through the ages. But the question is, by what? To figure this out, we're going to sit down with a legal scholar to discover the origins of law, its divine foundation, and how that impacts us today. Where does justice actually come from? You're going to love it. Thanks for joining us as we explore creation today. Hey, to my social media viewers out there, please hit that like and follow button. If you're new to the Creation Today show, we are on a mission to disciple the world one person at a time. And today, that is you. Thank you for tuning in. We want to take the stumbling blocks that keep you from seeing Jesus as the creator and the redeemer of mankind and turn those into stepping stones on your journey to know the truth. Special shout out this morning to KSCE TV 38, the Christian Television Life channel, yes, of the Christian Broadcasting Network. This week is the 1-year anniversary that they've been airing the Creation Today shows to their viewers. We're so thankful for that. And this week, they're going to begin airing the Spanish version of our first 2 short films, Night at the Creation Museum and Night at the Ark Encounter. I want to say thank you so much to their program director, Angel, and everyone at KSCE TV 38 for sharing our passion to reach the lost and help Christians grow in their faith. And by the way, that is what Creation Today is all about. We're a group of people that are being discipled through weekly conversations so that we can be all God has called us to be. If you ever want to help us disciple the world and reach the lost, come on over to creationtoday.org at creationtoday.org/partner to be part of what we are doing. Speaking of my partners, hey guys, Gary, 3 of you, 3 Garys on here today, guys. And Jane and Kimberly and Lisa and Andrew. Oh, so good to have you guys on here joining me and everybody else. I love getting this hour every week to just hang out and learn with you guys. Today's going to be no different. We are really going to have a good time learning together. By the way, partners, I had a great time. It was a privilege of mine this last weekend to be with 2 of our partners, David from Ohio and the Johannesson family from California. And I got to tell you, we had a blast. The fellowship was sweet and the food was really, really good. We actually met in Dallas, Texas at the ICR Discovery Center. We hosted the world premiere of the new Creation Today and ICR film, Night at the Discovery Center. It was an incredible experience. And I just want to say a special thank you to the Institute for Creation Research and the fantastic team at the Discovery Center for hosting the event and for making our world premiere so special. We're getting some fantastic feedback from people about our new film. There it is. We just got it out. It came out last week, Night at the Discovery Center. If you go to creationtoday.org/Discovery Center, you can get your digital or DVD copy of this film today. And we want you to share it with a friend because obviously we want the truth of God's word to prevail. And really, that's what justice is all about. It's letting truth prevail, the truth in science, the truth in the Bible. But then the question comes up, okay, well, where does justice actually come from? That's our conversation today, justice through the ages. Joining me to discuss this is a man who, I got to be honest, you just want to sit down and listen to. He has stories upon stories and a voice that captivates. He's a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, an Alabama State Defense Force Colonel. He is a graduate of the Air Command and Staff College. and graduate of the Air War College. He's a professor of law at the Oak Brook College of Law and Government Policies, and he is currently the legal counsel for the Foundation for Moral Law. As a constitutional attorney, he's defended homeschool, Christian school, the right of students to read the Bible and have Bible studies in public schools, the right to display the Ten Commandments in public areas. He has also authored numerous books, including Historical and Theological Foundations of Law, Christianity and the Constitution, God and Caesar, Columbus and Cortez. He's produced a variety of audio and video lectures, including the Institute on the Constitution and Here I Stand, a biblical worldview for the new millennium. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome my guest today, Lieutenant Colonel John Eidsmoe. John, welcome to the Creation Today show, sir.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be with you. And we just really hit it off when we were there at that conference in Idaho last April. And I'm glad we can renew our acquaintance again.
I enjoyed so much. I mean, guys, you got to understand, as soon as I met him, he had these books sitting on his table, and I went, what is this? And we started talking. I went, I need those books. I want this wisdom in my brain. And you, in the next hour, are going to get all of this. John, you're going to cover all of this, right? Are we going to get through it all?
Well, I thought I'd just sit down and read all 1,500 pages, but I don't think that's going to work, is it?
No, that would take a little bit more than our hour. But Volume 1, Ancient Wisdom, Historical and Theological Foundations of the Law. Volume 2, his Classical and Medieval Wisdom. And then Volume 3, the Reformation and the Colonial Period. You are covering all of history when it comes to law. I'm holding this 3-volume set. By the way, where can people get this? Where's the best place for them to get this 3-volume set? Because I really think people would enjoy that. Is that Amazon or your website?
Best way to do that would be just email me, and I'll give you the email address, eidsmoeja@juno.com. I think Amanda has that, and she can put it up there.
Perfect. We'll put that in the chat for you guys because this really is a powerful series. Just your introduction, as I read through that when I got it, just your introduction in Volume 1, going through the history of civilizations and why this is so important, was absolutely fantastic. It seems to me like we're missing ancient wisdom today, John. Can you talk about where we're at today briefly, and then let's take a journey through history and talk about justice through the ages?
We're missing a lot today. I think if there's one central issue that divides lawyers and judges throughout the country today, it is, what is the source of law? Which really means, what is law itself? Is law simply what man decides is going to be the rule? In other words, the highest human authority of the state has decided this is law and we have to obey because they have the muscle to back it up? Or does law reflect a higher source? And if so, what could that higher source be but, as pagans would say, the gods, or as we would say, God? And that's a real central issue too, is that a basic Hebrew principle of law was the unity of God himself. And what does that have to do with law? Simply that if there is one God, there is one truth. And if there is one truth, there is one law system. If you are a polytheist, then you'll believe that Marduk of the Babylonians had one set of laws, and Zeus of the Greeks had another, and Wotan of the Germans had another. But if there is one God, there is one truth and one law.
This is powerful because that changes everything right there. What do we see then throughout history? I mean, when we examine justice through the ages, are we seeing this very idea played out, that when civilizations believed in polytheism, how did we start? Is there an evolution to the law? I'm ready to honestly just sit and learn for a few minutes from you, John. Walk through this and teach us about the history of law then throughout the ages.
Many who are teaching law today would teach legal history as though, yes, there is an evolution from very simple forms of law to the more complex. You have the river theory of civilization, that civilization starts around rivers and develops from there. And then you have the idea there was originally the father figure in the clan, and people began to worship him as a god and so on. So his commands became law. You have these various theories. The fact is, however, legal history itself gives no support to the idea of evolution. In fact, it's very much the opposite. That you look to the Egyptians, you look to the Babylonians, you look to ancient societies, and they begin with a very sophisticated and enlightened system of law, and then it devolves. It gradually breaks down and becomes something brutal. You look to Babylonian, for example, and in Babylonian law, the early Babylonian law began with decentralized government. The city-states in ancient Babylon appeared to be at least somewhat democratic. Their rulers had limited authority. You go on to see that earlier they gave pretty substantial rights to women, and those were taken away as the Babylonian Empire progresses. You see that they begin with capital punishment only for a very few offenses, and gradually it becomes much more widespread for all sorts of offenses. This isn't progress. This is going the other direction. And in fact, I think you can see that throughout history, that societies start decentralized with limited government, and government gradually expands, it centralizes, it increases its power. We saw that in Greece, we saw it in Rome, we saw it in Western Europe, in England especially, and we're seeing it in the United States of America today. A basic issue in America today is, do we have a constitutional republic in which government has only those powers that we, the people, have delegated to it, and all others are reserved to the states or to the people? Or do we have what they like to call a living constitution, which that sounds attractive to most people? Only John Eidsmoe would want a dead constitution. But what they mean by this is a constitution that evolves with time. In fact, Woodrow Wilson made the statement in his book, The New Freedom, that all progressives ask is permission to interpret the Constitution according to the Darwinian principle. In other words, that the Constitution evolves with time, and that's what a living Constitution is all about. But this whole idea of a living Constitution really gives no protection for individual rights. Remember, we talk about this living Constitution approach, that as time goes on, we recognize a right to abortion that is found nowhere in the Constitution, a right to same-sex marriage, all this sort of thing. Don't forget, the same court that can read into the Constitution rights that aren't there can also read out of the Constitution rights that are there, or water them down, which is exactly what the court has been doing with the right to keep and bear arms, which they have upheld, but only by a 5-4 vote, the protection against the federal government regulating interstate commerce, which gradually got taken away, the right of free speech, which increasingly they're finding limitations on that right, the right to free exercise of religion, which they have downgraded, although I think that may be changed with the current court. But we are seeing the court evolve away rights, and that comes from this living Constitution approach, that we don't want a living Constitution, we want an enduring Constitution, one that protects the rights for all time.
Thomas Jefferson, in your book, right there in the introduction, you say Thomas Jefferson was in France and did not attend the Constitution or the convention, Constitutional Convention. But when he saw the list of delegates, he wrote to John Adams, "It is really an assembly of demigods." He added, "A more able assembly never sat in America, nor, we may add, has a more able body ever sat since that time." He looked at what we put together here in America as what you described as the foundation, where there's limited government and separation of powers to help control, to put padlocks on the government, to keep it from becoming big, to keep it from becoming oversized. He said, these guys looked at all of history and did it right. Describe that, and then let's go back and look at some of the points in history that helped them frame our modern government here in America.
I recall I participated in a public hearing here in Alabama some years ago on an effort to get a new state constitutional convention. And our Constitution in the state of Alabama has some pretty strict limits on what state government can do. But I recall person after person, and nearly all of those who were saying this were government employees themselves. I was not. And repeatedly, what we heard them saying is, the trouble with Alabamans is they don't trust their government enough. That sound you're hearing in the background is Thomas Jefferson turning over in his grave. Jefferson said in
That's
the Virginia resolution, or the Kentucky resolutions, pardon me, he said that in questions of power, then, let no more be said of trust in man, but bind him down from mischief with the chains of the Constitution. The problem is we trust our government too much, and the problem is that we should not be trusting our government, that we should fear our government, and we should make them fear us as well.
Yeah, I remember hearing from we had William Federer on, and he said it's just I don't know why I hadn't thought of it like this before. He said what Americans don't understand is that we, the citizens, we are the king, and to not hold our government accountable is derelict of duty on our part. We're the ones who have to hold them accountable and make sure government is limited, because that's what our founding fathers were worried about. Every government, and is that the case? Every government goes from somewhat of a good idea, decentralized power, and somebody ends up taking over, and it turns into a dictatorship or a oligarchy, or it turns into a form of government where the people that are being ruled are not better off. It ends up hurting people.
I'm not going to say that is universal, but let's just say that's a general trend. And
Okay.
unless something intervenes to change it, that just seems to be virtually universal. That I kind of like what James Madison said. And James Madison, some call him the father of the Constitution. I think others could be entitled to that title as well, but certainly he was one of the most influential delegates of the convention. A lot of people don't realize Madison had studied at the College of New Jersey. That's a little school. They changed its name recently to something like Princeton. But anyway, but he studied there under Reverend Witherspoon, and he learned the Hebrew laws and institutions in the original languages. But he made the statement in the Federalist number 51, that in questions of power, then, no, that's not, I'm sorry, that's Jefferson's statement. He said that if men were angels, no government would be necessary. In other words, what he's saying is the reason we need government is because of the sinful nature of man. If we didn't have a sinful nature, we wouldn't need government. But then he says if angels were to govern men, in other words, if men are sinful, but we had a few wise, benevolent philosopher kings like Plato spoke about, then we could just give them absolute power and they could wield in everybody's best interest. But Madison seems to be implying we're not angels, and those who run the government aren't angels either. And so he says, the question then is how to give government enough power to govern effectively, but to restrain that power so it does not become tyrannical and oppressive. And that's the challenge that the delegates of the Constitutional Convention faced, and they faced it by developing the United States Constitution. I sometimes summarize the Constitution with 5 basic principles, and I sometimes call these the Founding Fathers' 5-fold formula for freedom.
Oh, I'm taking notes. Okay, I'm ready for these. How do we
You might just
summarize
add this, that alliteration is almost always absolutely awful. But I said almost.
That's good.
But
that's good.
Anyway, principle number 1, limited delegated powers. Government doesn't have all power, and doesn't even have all power except that which we have limited in the Constitution. Government has no power except that which we have delegated to it through the Constitution. And any power not delegated is reserved to the states or to the people. So that's the first principle. And that's a cornerstone of limited government, and limited government is a cornerstone of freedom. Limited delegated powers. Second principle is separation of powers. The powers we delegate to government, we separate. We give some to the federal, some to the state, and some to the local. There's a vertical separation. And then we also have a horizontal separation into legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government. We see those functions of government. In fact, Isaiah even speaks of these when he says, the Lord is our judge, the judicial branch. The Lord is our lawgiver, legislative branch. The Lord is our king, executive branch. He will save us. There, you might even see the separation of church and state. But that we separate power into branches and levels so that no one branch, no one individual, no one agency becomes too powerful. The third principle then would be checks and balances. We don't just set up three branches of government and just trust them to go their own way and do their own thing. Then we'd have a three-headed tyrant instead of a one-headed tyrant. Rather, the branches of government check each other's power. Congress, for example, passes laws. The president has a check. He can veto those laws. Congress can override that check by a two-thirds vote of both houses. The court has the power to strike acts of Congress or actions of the president down as unconstitutional. But there are checks on the court. First of all, the members of the court are nominated by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. The Senate determines the court's budget. The executive branch enforces the court's orders. The Congress has the power to limit the court's appellate jurisdiction. So there are checks on all three branches like this. Fourth part of the formula, reserved individual rights. In other words, we're not a pure democracy in which the majority can do whatever it wants. We are a constitutional republic in which the majority generally runs things, but the minority has certain rights that even the majority cannot take away. For example, free speech, freedom of religion. If somebody were to decide that Creation Today is a very subversive program because they bring in weird people from Alabama who talk about things like the Constitution, and so they decide they're going to shut down this program, if the court is doing its job properly, it will say that you have this right of free speech and free exercise, whether the majority wants to recognize that right or not. One of those rights, by the way, is the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, which Justice Story in his commentaries on the Constitution described as the outer palladium, or that is outer wall of protection of liberty. That's the outer wall surrounding a fort. And that's the outer protection of our liberty. Somebody once put it this way, that if I had a choice between the right to keep and bear arms or the right of free speech, I'd choose the right to keep and bear arms. Wow. And then I can say whatever I want because I have a gun. but seriously, the framers saw the right to keep and bear arms as a protection not just against foreign aggression or against criminals invading our houses, but also against federal tyranny. And if you think that's radical, take up your complaint with Alexander Hamilton and with James Madison, because they both say this in the Federalist Papers.
I just started going through the Federalist Papers, and I honestly, I got on Audible, and as I'm listening to them, I go, wow, these guys were brilliant. They didn't just know about laws throughout history. They knew all about business and finance and what nations were doing. And how, like, these guys were incredibly brilliant. I mean, what Thomas Jefferson said about this assembly is true. These guys were amazing.
Well, I've had my students, and we got to get on to the fifth principle, but yeah. Let's just continue with what you're saying a minute about the Federalist Papers. I've had my students read the Federalist Papers, and they say that they're stimulating, they're thought-provoking, but some say that's the hardest thing I've ever had to read in my academic career, and all of these are college graduates. And wow. I can't resist taking debate on that a little bit, and I say, well, of course they're hard for you to read, because, you see, these were written to a very elite audience. The farmers of colonial America. And they were written as newspaper editorials to urge people to support the ratification of the Constitution. And I'll say, now, some of you can't quite understand that because you're graduates of public schools, and some of you have had your education stunted still further by 4 years at a state university. But wow. If you really study hard, you might be able to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and remotely approach the level of academic sophistication of the farmers of colonial America. Wow. They'll have footnotes in the Federalist Papers. They'll have references to things like this happened during the Theban Union in Greece, or this happened in the Peloponnesian War. They didn't even have to put footnotes in there to tell people what those were. Their audience would know what they were talking about. Well, the fifth part of the formula is responsibility through religion. Now, the framers did not want a state church, and neither do I. I don't want the Biden administration running the church. But they did recognize that religion, and when they used that word religion, they used it pretty much interchangeably with Christianity, that besides saving souls for eternity, religion also has the civic function of producing the kind of moral character that makes responsible self-government possible. Like Washington said in his farewell address, that of all the dispositions and habits that lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. Or as our second president, John Adams, who possibly was the greatest scholar ever to sit in the White House, including Jefferson. But as Adams said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. And if the Constitution seems to be eroding today, if we seem to be getting away from that concept of limited government, it is probably because we are no longer the moral and religious people that we were at the time John Adams wrote.
Wow. So the more immoral a society becomes, the more government you need to control the immorality of the society.
Exactly. People need control. And either that control is going to come from within, and we don't have that capacity to control ourselves from within. That has to be through the power of, I'll say broadly religion, but I'll say more specifically the Lord Jesus Christ working in our lives. Or else government has to supply the control from without. And that's the direction we're going today.
Wow. Okay, I want to get into what factors cause the de-evolution, if you will, the downward trend, the more government spiral where there's more and more and more power there, less and less to the people, because that's, you want freedom, but the more freedom you give up, the bigger government becomes. And so I want to get into that, but I need to let our social media go. Social media, you guys get the first half hour of this program. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I want you to get the series of books. Yeah, and thank you. You blessed me with these, and was so thankful to get these. Guys, you really need to understand the truth of law, where it comes from. John, can we unpackage the factors that cause law to de-evolve here in just a second, and kind of look? And I also want to know what is there something that is the biggest influence in law throughout the centuries? I mean, when we look at law over the ages, you studied it all through the ages, all these different forms of law. What is the factor? What is the thread that's kind of consistent through these? So I want to talk about that in just a second with you. But social media, thank you guys. Facebook, YouTube, my ex-followers, thank you guys for hanging out. Rumble, we appreciate it. To the television and podcast audience, thank you guys for tuning in today. Please, for my podcasters, if you didn't see it, I'll say it again. eidsmoeja@juno.com. eidsmoeja@juno.com to get these resources. And these are Historical and Theological Foundations of Law, Volume 1, 2, and 3. Historical and Theological Foundations of Law. You need to grab these, okay? Because it's really a powerful, powerful series. Hey, next week, we've got a great conversation for you next week. We did one before on widespread fraud in museums around the world, and that show took off. Everybody was fascinated by that. People on social media are loving it. The atheists are hating it. I'm telling you, that was really good. And that was with our friend, Dr. Carl Warner. I asked him to come back. He said, Eric, you're not going to believe it. We are watching right now the death of the naturalistic worldview. It is dying, and there's some people that are still trying to resurrect the old bones, but it is dead and gone. We're going to talk about the collapse of naturalism, how this worldview did not hold up to science, and it didn't hold up to logic next week. And you're going to really enjoy next week's conversation. So join me next Wednesday at noon for this great conversation. God bless you guys. I'll see you next week.